Hello there, and welcome to the Sleepy Science Channel. Tonight, we're stepping into the fierce and fascinating world of wildfires. Fire can seem like pure destruction at first glance. It tears through forests, climbs hillsides, and turns whole horizons orange. But wildfire is far stranger than that. It can shape landscapes, awaken hidden seeds, summon storms into the sky, and alter rivers, soil, and air long after the flames are gone. In some places, life has adapted so deeply to fire that without it, the land begins to change in unexpected ways. Tonight, we'll move through a world of burning treetops, underground embers, smoke that crosses oceans, and forests that rise again from blackened ground. We'll glimpse the creatures, plants, and forces that live alongside fire, and the ways people have learned, sometimes too late, that wildfire is not one simple thing. It is weather, chemistry, history, and survival all at once. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, all you need to do is settle in. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breathing slow. And allow your mind to settle into stillness as we explore this fascinating world of fire together. Let's begin. Some forests need wildfire, or they slowly begin to die. In many woodlands, fire is not an invader. It is part of the system that built the place in the first place. Without periodic burning, dead needles, fallen branches, and dense young trees begin to pile up across the ground. The forest floor grows crowded. Light struggles to reach lower plants. Disease and insects can spread more easily through stressed, tightly packed stands. In some pine forests of North America, regular low flames once moved through every few years, clearing clutter without killing the oldest trees. That kept the landscape open and resilient. When people stopped nearly every fire for decades, many of those same forests became thicker, darker, and far more vulnerable to catastrophic burns. It is a strange idea at first, but an important one. In the right ecosystem, the absence of flame can be as disruptive as too much of it. Sometimes the land stays healthiest when it is allowed to burn, breathe, and reset. A wildfire can create its own weather, wind, and lightning. At a certain scale, a blaze stops behaving like a simple line of flame and starts acting like a force of atmosphere. The heat rising from it can be so intense that air rushes inward from every side, feeding the fire with fresh oxygen and creating strong, erratic winds near the ground. Smoke and hot air then climb higher and higher until they begin forming towering clouds above the burn. These can grow into thunderheads driven not by a warm sea or a passing front, but by combustion itself. Inside them, moisture, ash, ice, and violent updrafts collide. That can produce lightning, sometimes striking far from the original ignition. In other words, the fire helps build a storm, and the storm can then cast sparks into new country. It sounds almost mythical, yet it is real. A large enough burn can bend the sky around itself and begin shaping the very conditions that determine where it goes next. Not every wildfire is a disaster. Some are part of nature's design. When people hear the word wildfire, they often picture tragedy, ash, sirens, and loss. That response makes sense, especially near homes and towns. Yet in many regions, burning has long been woven into the natural rhythm of life. Some grasslands stay healthy because periodic flames remove choking thatch and allow fresh shoots to return. Certain woodlands depend on occasional burning to hold back invading shrubs and maintain the balance of species that belong there. Even many animals have evolved alongside that cycle. Some hunt along recently burned edges. Others move into fresh habitat that appears after the smoke clears. The real danger comes when every fire is treated as identical. A low beneficial burn in a remote landscape is not the same as an extreme fast-moving blaze in a drought-stricken forest near a community. The difference matters. To understand fire properly, you have to see both truths at once. It can be devastating, and it can also be an ancient ecological process. Certain pine cones only open after intense heat from fire. Some trees keep their seeds locked away inside cones sealed with a sticky resin, almost as if the forest is waiting for a password. In certain pines, especially lodgepole pine in parts of North America, that password is heat. The cones may cling to branches for years while the seeds remain trapped inside. Then a fire passes through. The resin softens and breaks. The scales open. Suddenly seeds spill onto ground, but has just been cleared of shade and competition. The timing is remarkable. Ash can leave behind a temporary flush of nutrients. Sunlight now reaches the soil. Grasses and shrubs that would have crowded the seedlings have been stripped away. It is one of the most dramatic examples of a plant using destruction as an opportunity. The flames that seem to erase a forest can also unlock its next generation. What looks from a distance like an ending may be the very event those trees were built to survive and use. Wildfire smoke can travel across oceans and dim, distant skies. A major burn does not end at the fire line. Its reach can stretch far beyond the last glowing stump because smoke becomes a traveler of the upper air. Fine particles and gases can rise high into the atmosphere and then drift with large-scale wind patterns for astonishing distances. Smoke from fires in North America has crossed the Atlantic. Smoke from Siberia has spread across the Arctic and beyond. People thousands of miles away may wake to hazy sunlight, reddened sunsets, or a strange white disk where the sun should blaze. Sometimes the air still smells faintly scorched. Sometimes the sky simply looks muted and tired. That is one reason wildfire is never purely local. Even distant communities can feel its presence in their lungs, their weather, and the color of the day above them. A forest can burn in one hemisphere, and people in another can look up and see the evidence suspended overhead, like a message written in light and ash. Some flames move so fast they can outrun people on foot. Fire does not always creep. Under the wrong combination of wind, slope, dryness, and light fuel, it can race with terrifying speed. Grass fires are among the most dangerous examples because fine, dry blades ignite almost instantly and carry flame in a continuous sheet across open ground. A person who sees a fire at a distance may assume there is time to walk away, only to discover that the fire front is suddenly much closer than expected. Add gusting wind, and the flames can surge forward in bursts that are difficult to predict. Heat arrives before the main front does. Air becomes hard to breathe. Escape routes vanish. This is one reason firefighters treat open, flashy fuels with such respect. The landscape can look simple and low, but the fire behavior can be brutally fast. In the most dangerous moments, speed becomes the story. A blaze that seemed manageable from afar can turn into a moving wall that advances faster than human bodies can safely run. A single spark can awaken a fire miles from nowhere. Wildfire can begin with something almost laughably small. A fragment of metal striking rock. A loose chain dragging on pavement. A lightning scar hidden in a tree. A single ember lifted by wind and laid into the right patch of dry grass. That is part of what makes fire so unsettling. The beginning is often tiny, almost delicate, while the ending can be enormous. In remote country, one unnoticed ignition can smolder for hours before anyone sees smoke. By the time a plume rises above the ridgeline, the burn may already have spread through brush, timber litter, or grass. Distance makes it harder to detect and harder to reach. Roads may be poor or non-existent. Aircraft may be needed just to see the edge. It all starts with a simple transfer of heat to fuel, yet the consequences can unfold across valleys and mountains. Few natural forces demonstrate scale so dramatically. The smallest beginning can produce one of the largest events on land. Some giant sequoia trees owe their survival to repeated fire. Giant sequoias seem almost beyond fire, with their immense trunks and towering crowns, yet their long lives are tied to burning. These trees evolved in groves where low to moderate flames passed through again and again over centuries. Their bark is unusually thick and fibrous, which helps shield the living tissue beneath from heat. Regular burning also clears away dense undergrowth and opens patches of bare mineral soil where sequoia seedlings have a better chance to take root. Without that cycle, shade from smaller trees increases, competition grows, and the next generation struggles to appear. The great irony is powerful. The same element that terrifies us helped these ancient trees endure for millennia. Fire did not merely test them. It shaped the conditions that allowed them to persist. In healthy intervals, burning thinned the grove and reduced fuel buildup. For a living giant, survival was never only about resisting flame. It was about living in a landscape where flame returned at the right times. Wildfires can burn underground long after surface flames disappear. Sometimes a fire seems finished because the visible part is gone. The trees have stopped torching. The smoke has thinned. The ground looks dark and quiet. Yet beneath that calm surface, combustion may still be moving through buried organic matter. In peatlands, root mats, and thick duff layers, heat can creep slowly through the earth itself, feeding on ancient plant material dried enough to smolder. This kind of burning does not roar like a crown fire. It glows, tunnels, and persists. Crews may find hot pockets days later, or discover that smoke is venting from the soil in unexpected places. Rain can help, but not always enough. In some regions, these hidden burns have lasted for weeks and even reappeared after winter. That is one reason fire can feel almost alive. It can vanish from sight without truly ending. The spectacle may pass, but the chemistry continues below, inching through the dark where boots, roots, and ash meet in silence. Fire can destroy a forest, then help it return stronger. After a severe burn, the landscape can look final. Hillsides stand blackened. Needles are gone. The air smells mineral and raw. It is easy in that moment to believe nothing living could want such a place. But recovery often begins sooner than people expect. Sunlight now reaches the ground in full. Nutrients locked in dead material may be released into forms plants can use. Some species resprout from protected roots or buried buds. Others arrive from seed banks waiting in the soil. Birds, insects, and mammals move back in stages, each using the altered habitat in a different way. What returns is not always a copy of what was there before. It may be more open, more diverse, or more resilient to future disturbance. In the right conditions, burning can break stagnation and restart ecological processes that had slowed or stalled. The first view is loss. The longer view is transformation. Forests do not always end with fire. Sometimes they begin again because of it. Lightning starts many of the world's wildfires without human help. Long before roads, wires, or campfires, the sky itself was setting forests alight. A lightning strike can dump enormous energy into a tree, a snag, or a patch of dry ground in a fraction of a second. Sometimes the result is immediate flame. Other times the strike leaves a hidden ember buried in bark, roots, or duff. and the smoke does not appear until hours later. In remote mountain country, that delay can make the start feel eerie, as though the land ignited on its own. Across boreal forests, western mountain ranges and savannas, lightning has always been one of the great natural fire starters. It is part of the ancient conversation between weather and landscape. When storms arrive after a dry spell, one bolt can change a whole season. It reminds us that wildfire is not only a human story. In many places, it is also one of the oldest relationships between earth and sky. Dry grass can carry flames with astonishing speed across open land. A grassy landscape can look harmless compared with a dark forest, yet it can become one of the quickest pathways fire ever finds. Thin blades dry fast, ignite easily, and lie close enough together that flame can run through them almost without pause. In wind, the fire front bends low and races forward in rippling sheets, sometimes covering ground with frightening speed. There is little delay, little hesitation, and very little warning once it is moving well. That is why open rangeland and savanna fires can become so dangerous so quickly. The heat is lower than in some timber fires, but the pace can be far more alarming. Fences, tracks, and interlooking fields do not always slow it much. From a distance, it may resemble a glowing line skimming the earth. Up close, it feels more like motion itself has caught fire. In the right conditions, an open plain can carry flame like paper laid across the wind. Crown fires leap through treetops like fire running through air. There is something especially unnerving about flames that leave the ground behind. In a crown fire, the upper canopy becomes the main fuel, and the blaze moves from treetop to treetop with a speed and violence that can seem unreal. Needles, leaves, twigs, and resin-rich branches provide a connected layer above the forest floor, almost like a second landscape hanging in the air. Once that layer ignites, the heat intensifies dramatically. Fire can roar through the canopy while showers of sparks fall beneath it. Whole stands may torch at once, with crowns erupting in bursts that sound like freight trains or surf. This is the kind of burning that transforms a forest skyline into a moving wall of flame. It is also one of the hardest forms of fire to control because the energy release is so extreme. When the canopy goes, the forest no longer burns in patches. It begins to burn as one connected body. Surface fires and crown fires behave like different beasts entirely. Two fires can move through the same forest and seem to come from different worlds. One stays low, nibbling through litter, grasses, and fallen branches. The other climbs and erupts, turning the canopy into its main highway. The first may leave many mature trees standing and only scorch the lower trunks. The second can kill entire stands in a single run. That difference matters because it changes everything, from how the fire spreads to how crews respond to it, and what kind of forest remains afterward. Surface burning is often slower, lower, and more tied to what lies near the ground. Once fire transitions upward, the energy release rises sharply, and the danger multiplies. The change can happen when low branches, shrubs, or dead material act like ladders that carry heat into the crown. It is one of the most important turning points in wildfire. The same ignition can remain manageable or become something fierce enough to overwhelm the whole landscape. Ground fires can smolder through peat for weeks or months. Some of the strangest fires are the ones you barely see. In peatlands, where thick layers of partly decayed plant matter have built up over centuries, burning can sink below the surface and keep going with very little visible flame. Instead of racing forward, it creeps. Instead of roaring, it smolders. Yet the heat can remain intense underground, eating through carbon-rich material that has taken ages to accumulate. These burns may follow roots, cracks, and buried organic layers, surfacing unexpectedly in one place and vanishing in another. Smoke can seep from the earth like breath from hidden vents. Because the fuel bed is so deep, putting them out can be extremely difficult. Water may not penetrate far enough, and heavy machinery can struggle in soft ground. Some peat fires have lasted so long that they become less like an event and more like a condition. They turn the ground itself into fuel, and the landscape begins to burn from within rather than above. Peat fires can survive winter beneath snow and ice. It feels impossible at first. We imagine winter as the great extinguisher, the season that buries heat and ends the fire story. Yet in rich ground, smouldering combustion can persist beneath snowpack for months, insulated from wind and hidden from view. The flames are gone, but the heat remains trapped in buried organic layers, moving slowly through soil that still holds enough fuel to keep the reaction alive. Then, spring arrives. Snow melts. Dry air returns. What looked like a finished fire can wake again and begin sending up smoke from the same ground that seemed frozen solid. These are sometimes called zombie fires, and the name fits because they feel like a return from the dead. They are especially unsettling in northern forests and tundra regions where peat stores ancient carbon. A burn that slips under winter is not just a curiosity. It is a reminder that wildfire can operate on a timetable very different from the one our eyes expect. Some wildfire embers travel far ahead of the main front. The most dangerous part of a blaze is not always the wall of flame people can see. Often it is the small burning fragments lofted high into the air and carried ahead by wind. These embers, sometimes no larger than a leaf or chip of bark, can ride turbulent currents far beyond the visible edge of the fire. They may drift over ridges, highways, and cleared ground before dropping into dry grass, leaf litter, roof corners, or gutters. Then, minutes later, a second ignition appears where nobody expected one. This is one of the reasons wildfire spreads with such unsettling unpredictability. The fire line you map on the ground may not reflect where the real danger has already gone. A blaze can send out scouts before its main body arrives. In extreme conditions, those tiny glowing fragments become the advance guard of the fire itself. What begins as a shower of sparks in the sky can become a new emergency well beyond the original burn zone. Firebrands can start new blazes far beyond visible flames. A firebrand is a piece of burning material given flight, and it is one of wildfire's cleverest weapons. It might be a cone scale, a strip of bark, a twig, or a fragment of wooden debris lifted by heat and wind. Once airborne, it becomes a mobile ignition source, capable of landing in a place that still looks untouched. This is how spot fires begin. A hillside may seem safely ahead of the main blaze, then suddenly a thin ribbon of smoke appears there too. In extreme fire weather, these flying ignitions can multiply so quickly that the burn seems to leap across the landscape in separate bursts. For communities, this matters enormously. Houses do not always ignite because a flame front reaches the wall. Sometimes a single glowing fragment slips into a vent, a dry garden bed, or a pile of leaves beside a deck. The image is small, almost humble, yet the effect can be devastating. One burning fragment can redraw the whole fire map. A wildfire can jump roads, rivers, and fire breaks. Lines on a map often look more reassuring than they really are. Roads, rivers, rocky strips, and cleared breaks can slow a blaze, but under strong wind and heavy ember cast, they are not always enough. People sometimes imagine fire as a simple advancing edge that must touch each bit of ground in sequence. In reality, heat, wind, and lofted burning material can carry the problem across gaps that seem protective from the ground. A river may be wide, yet sparks can still blow over it. A road may look bare, but dry grass or structures on the far side can still catch. Even planned fire breaks can fail if weather shifts or if the break is too narrow for the conditions. That is part of wildfire's unsettling intelligence. It finds weak points in boundaries we trust. A barrier may help, and often does, but there are times when the fire simply reaches beyond it. What looks like separation can become only a pause. Steep slopes make flames race uphill far faster. A hillside changes fire in a surprisingly simple way. Heat rises. When flames begin climbing a slope, that rising heat is pushed directly toward unburned fuel above them. Vegetation uphill gets preheated before the fire even reaches it, which means leaves, needles, and branches need less extra energy to ignite. The steeper the slope, the closer that hot plume hugs the ground ahead. In practical terms, the fire begins preparing its own path before it arrives. That is why a slow burn at the base of a hill can become something much more aggressive as it starts to climb. To someone standing below, the transition can seem sudden and unfair. What looked modest a moment earlier is now rushing upward with far greater speed and intensity. In rugged country, this effect helps explain why ridges, drainages, and mountain faces produce such dangerous behavior. The shape of the land is not just scenery. It becomes part of the mechanism that drives the fire forward. Fires usually spread uphill faster than they spread downhill. Downhill runs can happen, especially under strong wind, but the natural tendency of a blaze is to climb more eagerly than it descends. The reason is rooted in the way fire shares its heat. On an uphill slope, flames tilt toward fuel above them and warm it in advance. On a downhill slope, much of that heat rises away from the fuel below instead. The fire loses some of its advantage. It is still dangerous, still capable of spotting and shifting, yet the geometry is different. This matters because slope can make a landscape feel deceptive. A valley floor may seem quiet, while the dangerous momentum is gathering on the rise above it. In mountain terrain, once a run begins upward, the fire can accelerate into the upper slope and crest far more quickly than people expect. It turns ordinary topography into a directional force. One side of the hill becomes an invitation, while the other offers at least some resistance, though never enough to be trusted completely. Canyons can funnel heat and turn small fires explosive. A canyon is more than a gap in the land. During a fire, it can behave like a giant chimney. Narrow walls confine heat, smoke, and rising air, forcing them upward in concentrated streams. Wind can also accelerate through these spaces, especially where terrain channels it into a tighter path. The result is a place where fire can intensify rapidly and move in ways that seem startlingly sudden. What began as a modest burn low in a drainage can become far more dangerous once the heat starts stacking and the air begins pulling hard through the canyon. Side slopes may ignite in sequence, and the whole feature can amplify the fire's energy. This is why rough topography is studied so closely by fire crews. A map contour is not just a line. It may describe a place where the land itself is ready to magnify combustion. In the wrong conditions, a canyon does not merely contain a fire. It teaches it how to surge. Wind can twist flames into towering fire whirls. Most people think of wildfire as a front, a wall, or a line. Yet sometimes the air itself begins to spin, and the flames gather into a rotating column. A fire whirl forms when intense heat creates a strong upward draft, and surrounding winds feed into it unevenly, adding rotation to the rising plume. The result can be a twisting tower of flame, ash, smoke, and debris that looks almost unreal. Some are small and short-lived, like fiery dust devils. Others grow large enough to move across the ground and throw embers in every direction. What makes them so unnerving is the sudden shift from broad fire behavior to something concentrated and violent. The energy seems to stand up and take shape. While a burning landscape already difficult to predict, Rotation adds another layer of chaos. It is the atmosphere grabbing hold of the blaze and giving it a spine. For a few moments, the fire no longer only spreads. It begins to whirl. Fire whirls can fling burning debris like a storm. Once a rotating column forms, it becomes more than a dramatic shape. It becomes a delivery system. The spinning outdraft can lift embers, branches, bark, and other burning fragments high into the air, then scatter them far from the original source. Instead of sparks drifting in one general direction, debris can be hurled unpredictably, dropped in clusters, or carried into places that seemed outside the danger zone. This is one reason fire whirls are feared, even when they are brief. Their path may be narrow, but their effect can be wide. They can cross lines, ignite spot fires, and shower structures with hot material in ways that ordinary flame spread does not. To anyone nearby, it can look as though the fire has learned how to throw. The scene becomes storm-like, with heat and motion combining into something that behaves part weather and part combustion. In those moments, the wildfire does not merely consume what is ahead. It begins to attack places at a distance. Some fire tornadoes have destroyed buildings in seconds. The phrase sounds exaggerated until you realize that some rotating fire columns have reached such intensity that they behave with extraordinary force. In rare extreme cases, these vortices become large, violent, and hot enough to tear through built areas with shocking speed. Roofs fail. Walls ignite. Debris is ripped up and carried away in a storm of heat. Unlike an ordinary flame front that might pass with a broad edge, a powerful rotating column can focus destruction in a narrow but ferocious track. Witnesses have described them as roaring, dark, and almost mechanical in their motion. What makes them terrifying is not only their power, but their strangeness. They do not fit the usual picture of a forest fire or a tornado, yet they borrow something from both. In those seconds, the landscape is hit by a moving core of fire and rotating wind at once. It is one of wildfire's most extreme expressions, and one of the hardest for the mind to accept. Hot air above a fire can collapse unpredictably. We tend to imagine rising heat as a one-way motion, upward and away. But the air column above a large burn can become unstable. If the plume weakens, cools, or loses support, some of that turbulent structure can collapse and send chaotic winds back toward the ground. For crews on the line, this matters because wind direction and intensity may shift suddenly without the obvious arrival of a new weather system. Smoke that was climbing vertically may begin to spread, curl, or press downward. Flames that seem to lean one way can abruptly surge another. In the most dangerous cases, the fire's own convection begins to break down and reorganize, creating erratic gusts that scatter embers and push the burn into new fuel. It is part of what makes large fires feel alive and difficult to trust. The air above them is not stable scenery. It is an engine. And sometimes that engine falters in ways that send energy back down into the landscape. Wildfires can create pyrocumulus clouds that boil over the landscape. There comes a point in some large fires when the smoke column stops looking like smoke alone and begins to resemble a weather system under construction. Pyrocumulus clouds form when intense heat drives moist air, ash, and combustion gases upward so powerfully that the plume cools and condenses into a towering cloud. Seen from afar, it can look like a giant white or grey mass building over the fire, like something volcanic. The shape is familiar, almost like a summer cumulus cloud, yet its origin is entirely different. It was born from burning vegetation and rising heat rather than ordinary daytime instability alone. The effect on the landscape can feel overwhelming. The fire is no longer only on the ground. It has written itself into the sky. These clouds are important because they signal strong convection and a blaze capable of influencing the atmosphere above it. A burning forest has become a cloud-making machine, and a horizon begins to boil with its power. The biggest fires can build thunderclouds from smoke and heat. At the most extreme end of fire behavior, the rising plume can grow deep enough and unstable enough to form towering storm clouds with real thunderstorm structure. This happens when the heat source is so intense that air surges upward into cooler layers of the atmosphere, where moisture condenses, ice forms, and electrical charge begins to separate. What started as fire behavior becomes atmospheric architecture. A blaze on the ground has effectively assembled the ingredients for a storm above itself. From a distance, the sight is extraordinary. A column of smoke climbs into a dark anvil-like cloud, as though the fire is trying to manufacture weather from scratch. These fire-built storms can create violent downdrafts, shifting winds, hail, and lightning. They also signal a blaze operating on a scale beyond ordinary suppression tactics. Once a fire begins helping construct its own thunderstorm, the relationship between land and sky changes. It is no longer a fire beneath weather. It is a fire participating in weather. Pyrocumulonimbus storms can throw lightning from the fire itself. This is one of wildfire's most astonishing tricks. Under extreme conditions, a fire-generated thunderstorm called a pyrocumulonimbus can become electrically active and begin producing lightning. Inside the towering cloud, ash, water droplets, and ice particles collide and separate charge, much as they do in ordinary thunderstorms. The difference is that the heat engine driving the whole structure is the fire below. So the blaze helps build a storm, and a storm can strike back down with lightning that starts new ignitions elsewhere. It becomes a chain reaction written across land and sky. One fire breeds a storm, and the storm may breed more fire. That feedback loop is part of why these events are so feared. They signal a system that is no longer behaving in a simple, local way. The atmosphere has joined the burn in a direct and dangerous partnership. Few moments reveal wildfire's scale more clearly than seeing lightning flash from a cloud that the fire itself helped create. Wildfire thunderstorms can start entirely new fires miles away. Once a fire-built storm matures, its influence can extend far beyond the original burn area. Lightning may strike dry ground well ahead of the main plume. Downbursts can push the existing fire in new directions. Embers lifted into the storm's circulation may be dropped at a distance. What began as a single incident can turn into several, scattered across separate ridges, valleys, or stretches of forest. To people on the ground, it can feel as though the landscape is being ignited in chapters, one after another, by the same event. This is one reason extreme fire days are so difficult to manage. The problem is no longer confined to one perimeter. The storm can create fresh starts in places that were previously outside the emergency. Wildfire has, in effect, built itself a mechanism for expansion. It is one of the clearest examples of fire becoming a system rather than a line. The original flames remain, but now the sky is helping write the next chapter. Smoke plumes can rise high enough to reach the stratosphere. Most smoke stays in the lower atmosphere, where winds and weather churn it around and gradually bring it back down. But the biggest fires can punch far higher. When heat rises with enough force, it can carry smoke upward through the troposphere and into the stratosphere, the dry, stable layer where commercial aircraft often cruise and where ordinary weather does not happen. That is an astonishing journey for the remains of burning trees and grass. Once smoke gets there, it can linger much longer because rain clouds are no longer there to wash it out quickly. Scientists watch these towering injections closely because they show that wildfire is not just a surface event. In the most extreme cases, a forest fire can disturb layers of the atmosphere normally influenced by volcanoes and major storms. The flames are on the ground, yet their imprint rises into a realm of sky that most weather never touches. Massive fire plumes can circle the planet for weeks. Once smoke enters the upper atmosphere, it can begin a voyage that feels almost unbelievable. Winds at those heights can carry the plume across continents, oceans, and entire hemispheres. Satellites have tracked fire smoke making loops around the globe, thinning and stretching as it travels, yet still remaining detectable for weeks. In effect, a blaze in one region can leave a faint signature in the sky over places that never smelled the original burn. That is one reason wildfire belongs to planetary science as much as local disaster response. The event does not end where the flames stop. It becomes part of a larger atmospheric story, moving with circulation patterns that ignore borders and coastlines. Imagine a forest burning in one country, then its smoke drifting above another, then another, until it has gone nearly all the way around Earth. The scale is hard to grasp, yet it happens. A single season's fire can write a ring around the sky. Wildfire smoke changes sunsets, moonlight, and the color of day. Smoke does something deeply strange to familiar light. On an ordinary clear day, sunlight arrives bright and balanced, scattering through the atmosphere in a way our eyes accept without thinking. Add smoke, and the rules begin to shift. Fine particles scatter shorter wavelengths differently, which can mute the blue of the sky and deepen the reds and oranges of sunrise and sunset. The sun may appear as a dim copper disk. The moon can turn amber. Midday can look unnaturally pale, as if the world has been covered by a thin veil. Sometimes the light becomes soft and sepia. Other times it feels bruised and metallic. People far from the flames may not hear sirens or see ash falling, yet they still know something is wrong because the sky looks altered, almost theatrical. It is one of wildfire's eeriest powers. It can tint ordinary daylight with the atmosphere of another world, and suddenly even noon feels like evening. Smoke can carry tiny particles deep into human lungs. The danger of wildfire is not only what burns, it is also what becomes airborne. Smoke contains an unsettling mix of gases and microscopic particles, including bits small enough to bypass the body's usual defenses in the nose and throat and travel deep into the lungs. Once there, they can irritate delicate tissues, worsen asthma, strain the heart, and make breathing harder even for healthy people. That is why smoke can turn a distant fire into a medical event for entire cities. You do not need flames at your doorstep to feel the effects. A hazy horizon and a faint burnt smell can mean the air itself has become a carrier of harm. What makes this especially difficult is that the most dangerous particles are often too small to see. The sky may look only slightly dimmed, yet the body notices. With wildfire, the atmosphere becomes part of the emergency, and every breath joins the story. The smoke often travels farther than the flames ever do. A wildfire may consume one valley, one forest, or one stretch of grassland, yet its smoke can become the true long-distance traveler. Flames are limited by fuel, terrain, and weather on the ground. Smoke is not. Once lifted into moving air, it can ride winds across mountains, into cities, over seas, and through regions untouched by the burn itself. That is why people hundreds or even thousands of miles away can wake to poor air quality from a fire they have never seen. The burn scar stays local. The atmospheric footprint spreads outward like a second event. In a way, smoke is the part of the fire that refuses to remain where it started. It turns one landscape's burning into another landscape's haze. This shift matters because it changes how we think about impact. Wildfire is not only about what the flames consume. It is also about what the air carries away and how far the consequences can drift. Some animals flee fire, while others rush toward burnt ground. Fire sends a landscape into motion, but not all creatures respond in the same way. Deer may bolt from the advancing heat. Birds may lift in sudden waves. Burrowing animals may hide underground until the danger passes. Yet almost as soon as the flames move on, another set of species begins arriving. Some are drawn by exposed insects, fresh shoots, open ground, or new feeding opportunities created by the burn. Raptors may hunt along smoking edges. Grazers may return for tender regrowth. Scavengers may investigate what the fire has left behind. It is one of wildfire's most surprising truths. The same event that scatters life can also summon it back in new forms and sequences. A burn site is not empty for long. It becomes a changing stage where different species arrive according to timing, heat, and opportunity. The exodus is dramatic, but so is the return. Fire does not only clear a landscape, it reorganizes who comes, who leaves, and who thrives next. Black-backed woodpeckers thrive in forests transformed by fire. To many birds, a burned forest would seem like a ruined place. To the black-backed woodpecker, it can be close to ideal. This bird is strongly associated with recently burned conifer forests, where fire-killed trees quickly fill with wood-boring beetle larvae. Those trunks become both pantry and workplace. The woodpecker drills through charred bark and pale dead wood, feeding on insects that flourish after the heat has passed. Its dark back blends uncannily well with scorched bark, as though the bird itself belongs to the aftermath. In that sense, it is a creature of the second act, arriving not for the flames, but for the transformed habitat they leave behind. Burned forests may look lifeless from a distance, yet for this bird, they can be full of sound, food, and nesting sites. It is a perfect example of an animal tied not to untouched wilderness, but to change itself. Some species do not merely survive disturbance. They specialize in its aftermath. Some beetles can detect wildfire heat from remarkable distances. Certain insects have evolved abilities that sound almost impossible. Jaw beetles in the genus Melanophila are famous for sensing the infrared radiation produced by fire, allowing them to locate recently burned trees from extraordinary distances. To them, a fire is not just danger. It is opportunity. Freshly scorched wood offers ideal places to lay eggs because the weakened trees and warm conditions can favor the larvae that hatch there. These beetles carry specialized heat-sensitive organs that act like tiny fire detectors, guiding them toward landscapes that have only just burned. Imagine being able to feel a distant blaze, not with your eyes, but with your body. That is the world these insects inhabit. They turn a catastrophe for one organism into a signal for another. Wildfire, in their case, is not only an ending, it is a beacon. The forest sends up heat, and somewhere in the air, a beetle answers, drawn toward the blackened trunks before the ground has fully cooled. Fire-loathing insects arrive while the ground is still warm. The aftermath of a blaze does not wait for recovery to begin. In some places, insects appear almost immediately, moving into the burn before human eyes would expect life to return. Beetles, flies, and other species can be among the earliest arrivals, exploiting freshly dead wood, exposed soil, weakened plants, or newly available prey. For them, timing matters. The first hours and days after a fire can offer conditions that do not last long. Bark may still trap heat. Sap flow may be altered. Predators and competitors may be temporarily reduced. It is a brief ecological window, and some insects are built to enter it fast. This gives burned ground a strange feeling of hidden activity. To us, the site may still look raw and emptied out. To them, it is newly opened territory. Fire does not create a pause in life so much as a turnover. The first colonists are often small, quick, and easy to miss, yet they help start the next phase. Certain orchids bloom more abundantly after a wildfire passes. Some flowers seem to wait for the right disturbance before revealing what they can do. In certain ecosystems, orchids and other wild plants produce stronger blooms after fire has moved through, especially when the flames remove dense competing vegetation and allow more light to reach the ground. Suddenly, the forest floor or open woodland that looked black and barren can begin producing unexpected bursts of color. It feels almost theatrical, as though the burn has lifted a curtain. Fire can also change nutrient availability and alter the balance between shading plants and those that need open conditions. For species adapted to that cycle, burning is not just damage. It is a release from crowding. The result can be one of the most surprising scenes in ecology, beauty emerging from char. People often expect recovery to mean slow greening and little more. Then the flowers arrive and change the whole mood of the place. A burned landscape can answer with blossoms. Some eucalyptus forests return quickly because fire is expected. In parts of Australia, fire is not an exception in eucalyptus country. It is part of the pattern those forests have lived with for a very long time. Many eucalyptus species show traits that make sense in landscapes where burning returns again and again. Some can sprout new shoots from protected buds beneath bark or from swollen woody structures at the base. Others recover through seed after the canopy is stripped. The visual effect can be remarkable. A place that seemed devastated may begin showing green shoots surprisingly soon, with trunks sending out fresh growth from surfaces that looked dead. That quick return is not a miracle in the dramatic sense. It is adaptation, written into the biology of the trees. These forests have not merely endured fire. Many have been shaped by it across generations. That does not mean every blaze is harmless. Extreme events can still overwhelm them. But in the right range, the landscape responds not with shock alone, but with a practiced kind of resilience. Banksia plants can release seeds only after being scorched. Some plants keep their future sealed away until flame gives permission. Many Banksias of Australia store seeds in woody cones or follicles that remain closed for years, sometimes long after the plant has flowered. Heat from fire opens those structures and releases the seeds onto freshly cleared ground. The timing is extraordinary. Competition has been reduced. Light reaches the surface more easily. Nutrients from hash may briefly be more available. The burn does not simply threaten the next generation. It creates the conditions that may help launch it. This strategy is one of wildfire's clearest examples of life turning danger into choreography. The plant has, in effect, tied its reproduction to a landscape-scale event. For long periods it waits, holding its seeds tight through sun, wind, and age. Then a blaze arrives, and the release begins. What seems like destruction to an outside observer may be, for the plant, the signal that the world is finally ready. Chaparral shrubs may burst back after fire with fresh growth. Chaparral country often looks dry, tough, and sun-scorched even before any flame arrives. Yet many of its shrubs carry hidden reserves that make fire less final than it appears. After a burn, some species send up vigorous new shoots from crowns, roots, or underground structures protected from the worst heat. Others rely on seed banks triggered by the changed conditions. The speed of return can be startling. Black stems that seemed lifeless can suddenly be ringed with bright green. Hillsides that looked reduced to ash begin filling with new texture and color within a season. This does not happen because the plants are untouched. It happens because the ecosystem has been shaped by long histories of burning and regrowth. Chaparral is not passive in the face of fire. It is built for aftermath. The first flush of new shoots can make a burned slope look almost electric, as though the land has decided to answer flame with growth rather than silence. Aspen forests can regrow from roots after intense burns. Aspen may look like a grove of many separate trees, but beneath the surface, it often behaves more like a connected organism. Many stems belong to the same root system, linked underground and capable of responding together when the canopy above is lost. After an intense burn, those roots may remain alive even if the trunks are killed. Then, with competing conifers reduced and sunlight flooding the soil, thousands of new shoots can rise from below. It is one of the most dramatic forms of forest comeback. Instead of waiting for scattered seeds to land, the grove sends up its own replacement from a living network already in place. A burned hillside that seemed emptied can suddenly become crowded with young stems, all part of the old hidden body beneath. This gives aspen a particular power in fire-prone landscapes. The forest does not always begin again from scratch. Sometimes it begins again from memory, stored underground where the flames could not fully reach. Prairie grasses often return faster than the shrubs around them. On a prairie, the real architecture of life is often hidden below ground. The visible blades may be scorched away in a fast-moving burn, yet the deeper crowns, rhizomes and root systems of many grasses remain ready to respond. Once the fire passes, sunlight reaches the soil more directly, dead litter is reduced, and fresh green shoots can emerge with surprising speed. Shrubs, by contrast, may recover more slowly if their above-ground structure was more important to their survival. This gives grasslands a peculiar rhythm after burning. The surface may look erased for a moment, then quickly begin glowing with new green, while woody plants lag behind. That pattern helps explain why frequent fire has historically favored open prairie over brushier vegetation in many regions. Fire resets the contest, and grasses are often better prepared for the restart. What appears delicate in the wind turns out to be resilient by design, with strength anchored where the flames do not linger long. Fire can clear dead matter and recycle trapped nutrients. In many ecosystems, a great deal of material ends up tied down in dead leaves, fallen branches, old stems, and layers of litter that accumulate year after year. Fire can break that logjam. By burning away this built-up matter, it converts part of it into ash and mineral forms that become available again to living plants. In that sense, wildfire can act like a brutal but efficient recycler. The process is not gentle, but it is powerful. Nutrients that were locked in dry, tangled fuel are returned to the surface in altered form, ready to re-enter growth. This helps explain why some landscapes green up so quickly after a burn. The fire has done more than remove clutter. It has transformed what was trapped into something newly accessible. Of course, the balance matters, and too much heat can do harm. But in the right range, the effect is renewal through combustion. The dead past becomes the chemical beginning of the next season. Ash can briefly enrich soil before rains wash it away. After a burn, the ground may be coated with a pale grey layer that looks lifeless at first glance. Yet that ash can carry a short-lived pulse of mineral nutrients released from burned vegetation, including compounds plants may use during early regrowth. In the first days and weeks, before wind and water move it elsewhere, that surface layer can act almost like a fleeting gift from the fire. New shoots emerging through the blackened earth are rising into a chemically changed environment. The catch is that this window may not last long. Once rain arrives, especially on steep terrain, ash can be washed down slope or into streams, taking that nutrient pulse with it. So the enrichment is often temporary, a brief phase in a much larger story of erosion, recovery, and transport. It is one of wildfire's subtle transformations. The same event that reduced plants to powder also created a short moment when the soil surface becomes newly charged, then quickly begins to lose that gift again. Too much heat can also sterilize soil near the surface. Fire can renew a landscape, but there is a threshold beyond which the heat begins to strip life out of the ground itself. Near the soil surface, intense burning can kill fungi, bacteria, fine roots, seeds, and tiny invertebrates that normally help keep the ecosystem functioning. This is one of the great tensions in wildfire ecology. A low or moderate burn may clear litter and stimulate regrowth, while an extremely hot one can damage the living skin of the earth. The upper soil layer is where enormous biological activity takes place, much of it invisible. When that layer is baked too hard, recovery can slow because the hidden workers of decomposition, nutrient cycling, and plant partnership have been reduced. The landscape may still come back, but the path can be rougher and more uncertain. It is a reminder that fire is not simply good or bad. Its effects depend on intensity, timing, and how deeply the heat reaches into the world beneath our feet. Wildfire can make soil repel water like wax. One of the strangest effects of severe heating happens after the flames are gone. In some burned soils, organic compounds from plants and litter vaporize during the fire, then move downward and condense onto cooler soil particles below. That can form a water-repellent layer, almost like a thin, invisible coating, which makes rain less likely to soak in. Instead of entering the ground, water may bead, sheet off, or race downhill across the surface. The result is deeply counterintuitive. A landscape that looks dry, thirsty, and damaged can suddenly behave as though it is sealed. This hydrophobic effect matters because it changes what happens during the first storms after a burn. Runoff rises. Erosion increases. Slopes become less stable. It is one of the clearest examples of wildfire altering not just vegetation, but the physical behavior of the land itself. Heat has changed the chemistry of the soil, and the next rainfall will meet a surface that no longer acts the way it did before. Burnt hillsides can flood violently after even modest rain. A burned slope may appear still and spent, yet the next rain can reveal how unstable it has become. Vegetation that once slowed runoff and helped anchor soil may be gone. The ground may repel water rather than absorb it. Ash, silt, loose stones and branches sit ready to move. So when a storm arrives, even one that would have seemed ordinary before the fire, water can rush down slope with startling force. Instead of soaking in, it gathers speed, picking up sediment and debris until the flow becomes dense, muddy, and dangerous. Creeks rise quickly, channels choke, roads vanish under brown surges. In steep terrain, the result can look less like simple flooding and more like the hillside itself is coming down. This is one of the reasons wildfire's danger does not end with the last smoke. The burn transforms the landscape into something hydrologically unstable. Then the weather returns, and the fire's next chapter is written in water. Landslides often follow wildfire when roots no longer hold slopes. A hillside may look solid, but much of its strength comes from a hidden mesh of roots gripping the soil from within. After a severe burn, that support begins to weaken. Fine roots die first. Larger ones decay over time. The slope may still stand for weeks or months, yet it is no longer bound together in the same way. Then rain arrives, or snowmelt begins, and the ground starts to move. What fails is not just loose dirt on the surface. Entire sections of hillside can slump, slide, or break free, carrying rocks, mud, and charred timber downhill in a sudden mass. To people living below, the danger can seem to come out of nowhere because the fire is long gone and the sky may not look extreme at all. Yet the landscape has been structurally changed. Wildfire can strip away the stitching that held a slope together, and gravity waits patiently for the moment to pull. Rivers can choke with ash, sediment, and fallen debris. When fire tears through a watershed, the river downstream inherits the aftermath. The first strong rains can wash ash, loose soil, scorched branches, and whole fallen trunks into channels that were once clear and cold. Water that used to run bright may turn thick and grey or brown, burdened with material from the burned hills above. In narrower channels, debris can jam and redirect flow. Pools fill. Gravel beds disappear under fine sediment. Oxygen levels may drop as ash and organic matter change the chemistry of the water. To call this choking is not exaggeration. A stream can lose its rhythm, its clarity, and parts of the habitat structure that fish and insects depend on. Even reservoirs farther downstream may be affected as the pulse of sediment continues. The river becomes the collector of everything the fire loosened. Long after the flames are gone, the watershed keeps sending pieces of the burn downhill, and the water must carry the story. Fish can suffer long after the last visible smoke. For fish, the danger from wildfire often arrives late. A stream may survive the flames above it, only to be hit later by warm runoff, ash, sediment, and low oxygen when storms move through the burned terrain. Spawning beds can be buried. Insect prey can decline. Pools that once stayed cool beneath forest shade may heat up when the canopy is gone. Even if adult fish survive the first changes, eggs and young can be especially vulnerable to muddied water and altered flow. In severe cases, entire stretches of stream habitat can shift from complex and sheltered to shallow, unstable, and exposed. Recovery may take years because aquatic life depends on more than water alone. It depends on temperature, oxygen, cover, channel shape, and food. Wildfire can disturb all of them in sequence. The smoke fades from the sky, people think the event has ended, and meanwhile, underwater, the real struggle is only beginning. A severe fire can reshape an entire watershed. A watershed is more than a map boundary. It is a living system that gathers rainfall, feeds streams, supports soils, and moves water from ridges to rivers. A severe burn can alter nearly every part of that system at once. Vegetation that once intercepted rain is gone. Soil may absorb less water. Slopes erode faster. Channels receive more sediment and debris. Springs, creeks, and reservoirs downstream may all respond differently because the land above them now handles water in a new way. In practical terms, one fire can change how quickly runoff happens, how muddy the water becomes, and where future floods will cut or deposit material. This is why hydrologists and ecologists watch burned basins so closely. They know the event is not confined to the trees that burned. It has changed the plumbing of the landscape. The next rain does not fall on the same watershed that existed before. It falls on one that has been rewritten. Wildfires can open space for invasive plants to spread. After a burn, the ground can become a race. Native plants adapted to that landscape are trying to return, but so are outsiders that grow fast, seed heavily, and exploit disturbed soil with ruthless efficiency. Invasive grasses and weeds often excel in exactly those conditions. They move into open patches, take advantage of sunlight and bare mineral soil, and establish themselves before slower native species can reclaim the area. Once there, they can change the whole character of the place. Some create denser carpets of fine fuel. Others crowd out local wildflowers, shrubs, or tree seedlings. The danger is not only that fire clears space. It is that the wrong plants may be first to occupy it. Then the next fire behaves differently because the fuel bed is no longer what it used to be. A single burn can become the first move in a larger ecological takeover. The flames pass and the invaders enter through the doorway left behind. Repeated fires can permanently change what kind of ecosystem remains. One blaze may be survivable for a landscape. Many repeated too close together can push it into something new. Trees that need time to reach seed-bearing age may never recover if another burn arrives too soon. Shrublands may convert to grass. Forests may thin into open woodland or fail to return at all. Over time, the place still exists on the map, but it is no longer the same ecological system. That is one of the most powerful truths about fire. It does not only damage what is there in the moment. It can alter the future by changing which species get the time they need and which ones win repeated resets. Once that threshold is crossed, the shift may last for decades or longer. A visitor might see open ground and assume it has always looked that way. In reality, they may be standing inside a transformed world, one shaped not by a single catastrophic event, but by fire returning before the land could fully recover. Some landscapes burn in natural cycles measured in decades. Not every ecosystem burns at the same rhythm. In some pine forests, shrublands, and grass-dominated regions, fire has historically returned on intervals measured in years or decades, not centuries. That cycle matters because many plants and animals are tuned to it. Seeds, bark thickness, growth rates, and habitat patterns all reflect the expected timing of disturbance. If the interval is too short, recovery can be cut off. If it is too long, fuels build, species composition shifts, and the eventual fire may behave very differently from the one the system evolved with. In that sense, time itself is part of fire ecology. The land is not only shaped by whether it burns, but by how often. A healthy cycle can maintain open structure, biodiversity, and resilience. Break that rhythm, and the place begins to drift away from what once kept it balanced. Some landscapes do not merely tolerate periodic burning. They are organized around its return. Other ecosystems may take centuries to recover from one blaze. There are places on Earth where fire is not a regular visitor, but a rare and profound disturbance. High-elevation forests, slow-growing woodlands, and some cool, wet systems can take an extraordinarily long time to rebuild after a severe burn. Trees may need decades just to establish, and far longer to regain the structure of the original forest. Soil formation, canopy complexity, moss layers, and old habitat features can take centuries to return. That is why not all recovery should be judged by the first green shoots. A hillside may look alive again within a few seasons, yet the deeper ecological restoration may only just have begun. In these systems, one intense event can echo far beyond any human lifetime. The next mature forest is not waiting just around the corner. It is being assembled generation by generation. Fire still belongs to the story, but here its signature lasts much longer, and the memory of the burn remains written into the landscape for ages. Boreal forests store immense carbon, then release it in fire. The great northern forests of Canada, Alaska, Scandinavia, and Siberia hold one of the planet's largest carbon stores, not only in trees, but in soils, mosses, peat, and layers of partly decomposed organic matter built up over long, cold periods. Much of that carbon has been accumulating for centuries. Then, fire arrives, and a portion of it is returned to the atmosphere in a matter of days or weeks. That contrast is what makes boreal wildfire so globally significant. Slow storage meets sudden release. A black spruce stand may look quiet and remote, yet it is part of a vast planetary bank of carbon. When it burns, the effects extend beyond the local smoke column. They join the chemistry of the atmosphere itself. This does not mean boreal fire is unnatural. It has always been part of the northern cycle. But when larger or more severe burns release deeper stores, the consequences matter on a scale far bigger than the forest floor. Wildfires in the far north are growing stranger and larger. For a long time, many people imagined the far north as too cold, too wet, or too sparse to become a major fire story. That picture is fading. In recent years, northern fire seasons have produced burns of unusual size, persistence, and intensity across places once considered less vulnerable. The strangeness lies not only in the acreage, but in the behavior. Fires have burned deeper into organic soils. Smoke has traveled immense distances. Seasons have started earlier or remained active longer. Remote regions that once seemed beyond ordinary fire attention have begun producing events visible from space on a massive scale. For scientists, this is one of the most unsettling developments in wildfire. The boreal and subarctic are not simply repeating old patterns. They are beginning to show new ones. The north still looks quiet from above, with long forests and broad wetlands. Yet beneath that stillness, something is changing. Places associated with ice, muskeg, and cold are increasingly learning how to burn bigger. Arctic fires can burn ancient carbon locked in frozen ground. In the far north, some of the most important fuel is not standing above the ground at all. It is locked below, in frozen soils and permafrost-rich layers that contain ancient organic carbon built up over thousands of years. When fire reaches these systems, it can remove insulating vegetation and surface organic matter, allowing deeper thaw and exposing carbon that had long been held out of the modern atmosphere. That makes Arctic and subarctic fire uniquely consequential. A burn there is not just consuming recent plant growth. It can begin unlocking material from very old ecological history. In effect, flame opens a vault. Once thaw and decomposition accelerate, that ancient store may be released over time as carbon dioxide and methane. It is one of wildfire's most extraordinary connections to climate and deep time. A fire moving through tundra or northern peat is not simply burning what grew last season. It may be disturbing carbon that began accumulating long before modern civilization existed. Zombie fires can reappear after sleeping beneath winter snow. Some fires refuse to follow the seasons the way we expect. In northern peatlands and boreal soils, smoldering combustion can continue underground after snow has blanketed the surface and air temperatures have plunged. Hidden beneath frozen-looking ground, pockets of heat persist in carbon-rich layers that insulate and sustain the burn. Then, spring returns. Snow retreats. Dry conditions arrive. Smoke appears again from Earth that was assumed to be finished months earlier. These are often called zombie fires because they seem to rise after death, and the name is hard to resist. The sight is genuinely eerie. A landscape that survived winter begins exhaling smoke as though the fire had merely been waiting in the dark. For fire managers and scientists, these reappearances matter because they concede new season starts from old season remnants. Wildfire, in this form, stretches across the calendar. It does not end neatly with snowfall. It hides, holds, and returns. Tropical forests usually resist fire until drought breaks that balance. A healthy tropical rainforest is not easy to burn. Humid air, moist leaf litter, shaded ground, and dense canopy all help keep the system resistant to flame. In many intact rainforests, the problem is not ignition, but the lack of conditions needed for fire to spread well. That is why drought matters so much. When a long dry period strips moisture from leaves, litter, and woody debris, the balance begins to shift. What was once a damp, fire-resistant world can start to carry flame through the understory. The change is profound because tropical forests are not built around regular burning in the same way as many savannas or dry woodlands. Fire enters as a stress the system is poorly adapted to handle. Once drought has opened the door, even a relatively low fire can do serious damage to trees, roots, and canopy structure. The forest resists until it cannot, and then the consequences can be severe. Rainforests can become flammable when logging opens the canopy. Logging changes more than the number of trees. It changes light, humidity, wind, and the moisture balance on the forest floor. When the canopy opens, sunlight reaches areas that were once shaded, and air can move more freely through the understory. That dries leaves, twigs, and debris that would otherwise stay damp. Roads and disturbed ground also increase human access, which raises the odds of ignition. The result is a troubling transformation. A forest that once resisted fire can become vulnerable not because its climate vanished overnight, but because its structure was broken. In that altered state, flames can move through places that were never meant to burn often. This is one of the clearest examples of human activity reshaping fire risk indirectly. The chainsaw changes the atmosphere beneath the trees, and the fire follows later. What seemed like a separate problem turns out to be connected. Open the canopy, and you may also be opening the path for flame. Fire and drought together can push forests past recovery. A forest can survive drought. A forest can survive fire. What becomes especially dangerous is the combination of the two arriving in close partnership. Drought weakens trees, dries fuels, and reduces the moisture reserve seedlings need after the flames pass. Fire then kills mature trees, strips shade, and exposes the soil to harsher conditions. When the rains finally return, the window for recovery may already be narrower than before. Seeds may fail. Young trees may die in heat and dryness. Shrubs or grasses may take hold instead. In that way, fire and drought can work as a pair that pushes a landscape beyond the point where it easily returns to forest at all. This is not a dramatic instant transformation. It is a threshold crossed through stress upon stress. What comes back may still be alive and green, but it may no longer be the same kind of ecosystem. The old forest does not always return just because the flames are gone. Climate patterns can lengthen fire seasons across whole regions. Fire season is not a fixed date on the calendar. It is the period when fuels, weather, and dryness align enough to let wildfire spread. Large climate patterns can stretch that window by shaping temperature, rainfall, humidity, and snowpack over months. A region that once had a short, dangerous season may now dry earlier in spring, remain flammable deeper into autumn, or experience more repeated hot, dry spells in between. The effect is not always dramatic on one day, but over a whole region, it adds up. More weeks of vulnerability mean more opportunities for ignition, more strain on firefighting resources, and more overlap between fire and wind events that once occurred outside the main season. This is why researchers watch climate signals so carefully. They are not only trying to predict weather, they are trying to understand how long the landscape will stay ready to burn. In some places, the season is no longer merely starting earlier. It is lingering. Earlier snowmelt can leave forests drier for longer. Mountain forests often receive part of their yearly water as snow, stored across winter and released gradually as temperatures rise. That slow melt acts like a seasonal savings account, feeding soils, streams, and vegetation into the warmer months. When snow disappears earlier, the landscape begins spending that water sooner. By late summer, trees and understory plants may be facing a much longer dry period than they once did. Fuels cure earlier. Soils lose moisture over more weeks. The same forest can enter peak fire season already stressed. This is one of the hidden ways wildfire risk changes without any dramatic spectacle at first. There is no single storm of flame in the spring. There is simply less snow left to do its quiet work. By the time hot weather arrives, the forest has already been drying for a long time. The danger in summer may begin with what vanished months earlier, high on the slopes where snow used to linger. Heat waves can turn ordinary vegetation into ready fuel. A stand of grass, a patch of shrubs, or a forest floor may look unremarkable until a heat wave settles in. Then, something important happens. Moisture is pulled from leaves, stems, and litter at a much faster rate. Relative humidity often drops. Plants that were merely dry become brittle. Fine fuels that might have resisted a stray spark in milder weather become eager to ignite. That is why heat waves matter so much in wildfire. They can transform ordinary vegetation into a landscape primed for combustion, without changing its appearance all that much. The same hillside can go from manageable to dangerous in a matter of days. For firefighters, this is one of the most unnerving aspects of extreme heat. The fuels are not new. The land is not new. Yet the behavior of any fire that starts there may be entirely different. Heat strips away the margin of safety. What looked stable becomes ready, and one ignition is suddenly enough. Years of growth can become one season's fire load. Fuel accumulates slowly, almost invisibly. Needles fall. Branches die. Shrubs thicken. Grass grows after wet years and then cures. Trees weakened by drought or insects add more dead material to the system. None of it seems dramatic on its own. Then a dry, windy season arrives, and all that stored growth becomes available to burn at once. This is one of wildfire's most dramatic conversions of time. Years of biological production are turned into a single season's hazard. The energy released in a major burn often reflects a long, quiet history of accumulation that nobody noticed day by day. That is why one fire season can feel as though the landscape has suddenly become extreme, when in reality, the ingredients were being laid down over many years. A forest or shrubland does not ignite only because of the weather of the week. It also burns because the land has been building a combustible memory for a long time. Firefighters study fuel, weather, and topography like a moving puzzle. Fighting wildfire is not only about bravery near flames. It is also about reading a landscape that keeps changing while you look at it. Firefighters and analysts study fuel types, wind shifts, humidity, slope angle, aspect, access routes, and the condition of nearby vegetation, because all of it influences what the fire is likely to do next. A stand of conifers behaves differently from grass. A south-facing slope dries differently from a shaded drainage. A forecast wind change can redraw the danger map in hours. That is why wildfire operations often look like a blend of fieldcraft, meteorology, and strategy. Crews are not just attacking heat. They are trying to stay ahead of a moving pattern shaped by land and air together. In that sense, every fire is a puzzle that refuses to sit still. The clues are there, but they shift with the sun, the weather, and the burn itself, and reading them well can save lives. Every wildfire behaves differently, even in the same forest. Two fires can ignite in the very same stand of trees and still act like strangers to each other. One may creep through needles and fallen bark with low flame and little hurry. Another, under hotter air or stronger wind, may surge uphill, torch scattered trees, and send embers spinning far ahead. That difference can come from tiny changes in weather, fuel moisture, slope, or the exact way the vegetation is arranged on the ground. A shaded patch may slow the spread. A sunny opening may wake it up. Wind moving through one drainage can push a blaze hard, while a nearby ridge remains comparatively calm. This is why wildfire can never be treated like a machine with a single setting. It is more like a living reaction between land, air, and fuel. The forest may look familiar, but the conditions are never truly the same. Each ignition writes its own version of the story. Fire crews often fight flames by removing future fuel. One of the strangest things about fighting wildfire is that crews often battle it by working ahead of it. Rather than only spraying the visible flames, firefighters may cut brush, clear grass, fell hazardous trees, or scrape bare lines into the soil to deny the fire something to burn when it arrives. In some cases, They even use carefully planned firing operations to consume fuel under chosen conditions before the main blaze can reach it. The logic is simple, but the execution is anything but. They are trying to reshape the battlefield while the fire is still moving. Timing matters. Wind matters. Terrain matters. The opening must be wide enough, clean enough, and placed well enough to hold. This forward-looking strategy reveals something profound about wildfire. You do not always stop it by attacking the brightest flame. Sometimes you stop it by changing the future it is heading into, so that when it gets there, there is less left to feed it. Controlled burns can prevent far worse fires later. A controlled burn can look unsettling to people who are used to treating all flame as an emergency. Yet under the right weather, with crews in place and boundaries prepared, setting a carefully managed fire can reduce the chance of a far more dangerous one later. These burns consume leaf litter, dead branches, dense grasses, and young brush before those fuels can build into something explosive. They also help restore the kind of lower intensity fire many ecosystems once experienced more regularly. The key difference is choice. In a controlled burn, people decide the timing, the weather window, the location, and the pace. That makes the fire something to guide rather than something to chase. It is a rare example of using one fire to defend against another. The smoke is real and the heat is real, but so is the benefit. Sometimes the safest flame is the one lit on purpose, before a harsher season decides for everyone. Indigenous peoples have used cultural burning for thousands of years. Long before modern fire agencies existed, many indigenous communities used fire as a deliberate land-shaping tool. Cultural burning was not random burning, and it was not simply about clearing space. It could be used to encourage food plants, improve hunting grounds, maintain travel routes, reduce dangerous fuel buildup, support basketry materials, protect settlements, and sustain the health of entire dark landscapes. The timing was often precise, guided by season, local weather, plant cycles, and deep knowledge passed across generations. These fires were part of relationship and responsibility, not merely management in a technical sense. In many regions, landscapes Europeans later described as wild had already been shaped for centuries by this careful use of flame. That history matters because it changes how we understand fire itself. It was never only a destructive force or a modern emergency. It was also knowledge, practice, and stewardship. The land remembers that, even where those traditions were interrupted or ignored. Good fire knowledge can keep landscapes healthier and safer. Understanding fire changes the kinds of decisions people make long before smoke appears on the horizon. It shapes where homes are built, how forests are thinned, when prescribed burns are used, what plants are encouraged near communities, and how evacuation plans are designed. It also changes how people read a landscape. A hillside thick with dead brush stops, looking harmless. A stand of dense young trees starts to look like stored risk. Knowledge does not remove danger, but it does turn mystery into patterns people can act on. That matters for ecosystems too. When managers understand how often a place historically burned, how intense those fires were, and which species depend on them, they can work with the land instead of against it. In that sense, fire knowledge is both practical and ecological. It protects lives, but it also protects processes that belong to the landscape itself. The better we understand fire, the less likely we are to be surprised by what it has been trying to tell us. Suppressing every fire can make future fires more dangerous. For much of the modern era, the dominant idea was simple. Put every fire out as quickly as possible. That approach protected communities in the short term, and often for good reason, but across many fire-adapted landscapes, it also created a hidden consequence. Low and moderate burns that once cleared litter and thinned young growth were removed from the system. Dead material piled up. Forests grew denser. Shrubs crowded closer. Over time, the land stored more fuel than it once would have carried naturally. Then, when fire finally returned under hot, dry, windy conditions, it often had far more to work with. What had been prevented many times on small scales reappeared later in larger, more dangerous forms. This is one of wildfire's hardest lessons, because it turns a protective instinct into part of the problem. Immediate suppression can feel like success, yet if it becomes the only strategy, the landscape may be quietly preparing a much fiercer reckoning for the future. Decades without burning can fill forests with hidden fuel. A forest can seem healthy from a distance, while quietly becoming far more combustible underneath. Over years without fire, needles deepen on the ground, branches accumulate, saplings crowd into openings, and dead wood builds where low flames once would have trimmed it back. None of this announces itself dramatically. The danger grows in layers, hidden in the understory, between tree trunks and underfoot. That is why a long and burned forest can surprise people when it finally ignites. What looked green and stable may actually hold a vast reserve of dry, combustible material. Older fire regimes often kept some of these forests more open, with wider spacing between large trees and less clutter near the ground. Remove burning from that rhythm for too long, and the structure changes. The forest does not merely become older, it becomes loaded. The fuel is hidden in plain sight, stored in forms that seem ordinary until the day a spark reveals how much has been waiting there. Small, frequent fires once kept many forests more open. In many regions, especially dry pine forests and woodlands, the historical pattern was not endless calm followed by rare infernos. It was often a quieter rhythm of smaller, more frequent burns. These fires moved through grasses, needles, and low brush, trimming back young growth and reducing litter without necessarily killing the biggest trees. The result was a more open structure, with sunlight reaching farther, fewer ladder fuels, and greater spacing between trunks. In such places, fire acted like a recurring editor, removing the excess before it could become a problem. That older rhythm is important because it reminds us that severe wildfire is not the only natural form of burning. In many forests, the land once knew a different kind of relationship with flame, one marked more by repetition than catastrophe. The openness people admire in some old woodland landscapes was not always an accident of age. It was often partly built and maintained by returning fire. Night can slow some fires, but not all of them. For many fires, night brings relief. Temperatures drop, humidity rises, winds often ease, and fuels can regain a little moisture from the cooler air. Flame lengths may shorten. Spread may slow. Crews sometimes use those calmer hours to strengthen lines, protect structures, or make progress that would be much harder in the afternoon. Yet night is not a universal rescue. Some fires stay active after dark, especially when the air remains warm and dry, the wind persists, or the fuels are already so ready to burn that the usual nighttime recovery barely matters. In steep terrain, shifting air currents can also create surprising behavior after sunset. This makes nighttime wildfire both hopeful and deceptive. It can offer a crucial pause, but it can also fail to do so when people most expect it. The darkness changes the atmosphere, but it does not guarantee safety. A fire may rest a little, or it may continue moving with more purpose than anyone hoped. Some fires burn hottest when afternoon winds arrive. There is often a point in the day when a blaze seems to wake up. Morning may pass with moderate behavior, then the sun climbs higher, humidity drops, the air warms, and afternoon winds begin to flow with more consistency and force. That combination can transform the fire. Flames lean harder into unburned fuel. Embers travel farther. Small runs link into larger ones. What seemed manageable by late morning can become far more intense by mid to late afternoon. This daily rhythm is one reason fire crews pay such close attention not only to the weather forecast, but to the hour. Fire does not behave the same way across the day, even in the same patch of forest or grassland. Afternoon can be the period when heat, dryness, and wind finally line up. The land has been preparing for it since sunrise. Then the wind arrives, and the whole fire seems to gain a second, more dangerous voice. Humidity can change fire behavior within a single day. Fire is highly sensitive to the amount of moisture in the air. When humidity is higher, fuels near the surface can absorb a little moisture, making them slower to ignite and less eager to carry flame. When humidity drops, those same fuels dry out and become more available to burn. This can happen over the course of just a few hours. A grassy slope or needle-covered forest floor may behave one way in the cool of early morning and very differently by mid-afternoon. That shift is one reason wildfire can seem moody or unpredictable to people watching from outside it. The land may look unchanged, yet the chemistry of burning potential has moved. Fine fuels especially respond fast to the air around them. For firefighters, humidity is not a background number on a forecast. It is one of the daily levers that changes what the fire is capable of doing. The atmosphere dries, and the landscape becomes more flammable, almost in step. Dead branches above ground become ladders into the canopy. A severe wildfire often needs a route upward, and dead branches hanging along trunks can provide exactly that. When fire burns through surface fuels, those dry limbs can catch and carry heat higher into the tree, step by step, until the lower crown ignites. That is why foresters and fire specialists sometimes call them ladder fuels. They form a vertical path from the forest floor into the canopy, turning a ground fire into a treetop fire with far greater intensity. The image is surprisingly literal. Each branch is one more rung for the heat to climb. Dense shrubs beneath the canopy can serve a similar role. In forests where those connections are abundant, a modest flame at ground level may not stay modest for long. It finds a way up. This is one of the key structural differences between a forest that resists crown fire and one that invites it. The danger is not only what lies on the ground, it is what links the ground to the sky. Fine fuels ignite first, then feed larger burning material. When a fire starts, it usually begins with the smallest things. Dry grass, needles, leaves, bark flakes, and tiny twigs are called fine fuels, and they respond quickly because they dry quickly and heat up quickly. A spark that would never ignite a thick log may set these small materials alight almost immediately. Once burning, they produce the heat needed to ignite heavier branches, shrubs, woody debris, and eventually larger fuels that sustain the fire for longer. In that sense, fine fuels are often the first language a fire speaks. They are the quick answer to a spark, the bridge between ignition and a much bigger event. This is why a harmless-looking carpet of dry grass or needles can be so important. It is not dramatic on its own, yet it determines whether the fire gets a foothold at all. The blaze begins small, with the easiest things to burn, and from there it recruits the heavier fuel waiting behind them. Moisture inside plants can decide whether flames take hold. Living vegetation is not all equally flammable. A great deal depends on how much water remains inside leaves, stems, and needles. When plants are well hydrated, some of the heat that reaches them must first go into driving off that water before the tissue can ignite. That slows things down. But when drought, heat, or seasonal drying lowers that moisture content, the same plant may become far more willing to burn. This is why two stands of green-looking vegetation can behave very differently. One may resist ignition. The other may carry flame readily because its tissues are much drier than they appear. In wildfire, appearances often mislead. Green does not always mean safe. Internal moisture is one of the hidden conditions shaping what happens next. The fire arrives at the plant, and the plant itself decides part of the story through its water content. The difference between resistance and combustion may be stored silently inside a leaf. Resin-rich trees can burn with startling intensity. Some trees carry within them a chemistry that makes fire more dramatic once ignition begins. Species rich in resin or volatile oils can burn with sudden intensity because those compounds ignite readily and add energy to the flame. Needles may flash. Bark can burn fiercely. Cones and branches may throw embers with unnerving enthusiasm. This does not mean such trees are unnatural or poorly adapted. Many belong exactly where they grow. But it does mean the kind of fuel they provide is especially potent under the right conditions. A stand containing resinous species can shift from surface involvement to torching faster than someone unfamiliar with it might expect. The tree is not only wood and water. It is also stored chemistry, and some of that chemistry burns hot. This helps explain why certain forests can feel explosive once the fire enters them. The flames are drawing not just on dry structure, but on compounds that were built by the tree itself over years of growth. A house can ignite from radiant heat without direct flame. Wildfire does not always need to touch a building to destroy it. If a nearby fire burns hot enough, the radiant heat alone can be sufficient to crack windows, ignite exposed materials, or bring parts of the structure to ignition temperature. It works like an invisible transfer of energy across space. The house may seem outside the flame front, yet it is still being heated intensely from afar. This is one reason homes can be lost, even when people later say the flames never actually reached them in the obvious sense. Siding, decking, fences, curtains near broken glass, and dry items around the structure can all become vulnerable when exposed to prolonged heat. The fire is communicating through energy, not contact. That makes wildfire around communities especially deceptive. Distance that looks protective may not be enough. The gap between flame and structure can be crossed by heat itself, and the building begins to burn because the fire came near, not because it arrived directly. Ember storms often destroy homes that flames never touch. One of the most important and least intuitive truths about wildfire near communities is that homes are often lost to embers rather than to the main flame front. During intense burning, huge numbers of glowing fragments can be lofted into the air and carried into neighborhoods, where they land in gutters, roof edges, vents, garden mulch, doormats, decks, and dry vegetation. Right beside walls. A house may survive the first passage of the visible fire, only to ignite minutes later from several tiny starts around the property. This is why post-fire scenes can seem confusing. One home is gone, while another nearby is standing. The difference may have been one ember in one vulnerable spot. The storm of small ignitions is what makes wildfire around buildings so complicated. The flames on the hillside are only part of the danger. The real battle may be happening above and around the structure, where thousands of burning fragments search for the smallest weakness. One open vent can invite embers into a house. A house under ember attack behaves a little like a ship in a storm. Most of the structure may hold, but one opening in the wrong place can let the danger inside. Vents are especially important because they are designed to allow airflow into attics, crawl spaces, and other hidden voids. During a wildfire, that same opening can admit glowing embers. If those land on dry material inside, the fire may begin within the structure itself, out of sight at first. That is part of what makes ember-driven house loss so unsettling. The ignition point may not be dramatic. It may be a tiny glowing fragment slipping through a necessary feature of the building. Once inside, it can smolder unnoticed, until flames appear where nobody expected them. This is why vent design, screening and placement matter so much in fire-prone regions. Wildfire does not always batter a house down from the outside. Sometimes it enters through the smallest invitation and starts burning from within. Defensible space can save structures when fire approaches fast. Defensible space is the buffer around a building where vegetation, debris, and combustible materials are reduced, so that flames have less to work with near the structure. The idea sounds simple, yet its effect can be profound. A house surrounded by dry brush, stacked firewood, overhanging branches, and untrimmed grass gives fire multiple ways to reach it. A house with clear spacing, leaner planting, and fewer ignitable materials nearby is much harder to involve. This does not guarantee survival in every extreme event, but it can change the odds dramatically. It gives firefighters a safer place to work, and it reduces the chance that a small surface fire or ember landing turns into full structural ignition. In fast-moving fire, those few meters around a home become some of the most important ground in the entire landscape. The broader forest may be burning fiercely, yet the fate of one building may depend on how carefully that immediate ring of space was prepared before the season began. Wildland-urban edges are where fire and housing collide. The wildland-urban edge, often called the wildland-urban interface, is where human development meets flammable vegetation. It is one of the most consequential landscapes in modern wildfire because it brings homes, roads, power lines, gardens, and people into close relationship with forests, shrublands, and grasslands that naturally, quote, ban. These edges can be beautiful places to live, with views, trees, and open land nearby. But that same proximity means a wildfire moving out of the wild can become a structure fire problem very quickly, while human activity inside the built area can also provide new ignition sources. In other words, the boundary works both ways. It is not simply nature threatening neighborhoods. It is a zone of contact where two systems overlap and amplify each other's risks. This is why so many of the most destructive modern fire disasters happen there. The collision is not accidental. It is built into the geography of how people increasingly choose to live. Some of history's deadliest fires became tragedies in settled landscapes. The most devastating fire disasters often happen not in empty wilderness, but where people, buildings, roads, and panic are drawn into the path of flame. Once settlements enter flammable country, wildfire becomes more than an ecological event. It becomes a human chain reaction. Houses ignite, smoke blinds escape routes, vehicles clog narrow roads, and ordinary landscapes turn deadly because too many vulnerable things are packed close together. That pattern has appeared again and again across different centuries and continents. A fire that might once have burned through forest or grassland becomes a catastrophe when it meets towns, farms, or scattered homes built into dangerous terrain. In those moments, the story is no longer only about weather and fuel. It is also about design, access, warning, and timing. History shows that the deadliest fire tragedies are often born where natural fire meets human settlement, and where the landscape's old rhythms collide with the places people thought were safe enough to stay. The Peshtigo fire killed more people than Chicago's famous fire. In the same general period that the Great Chicago Fire entered legend, another blaze in Wisconsin became even deadlier, though it is far less widely remembered. The Peshtigo fire tore through a region of forests, towns, and logging settlements with horrifying force, killing far more people than the fire that consumed Chicago. Part of the reason it vanished from popular memory is cruelly simple. Chicago was a major city, with newspapers, wealth, and national attention. Peshtigo was smaller, more remote, and easier for history to overlook. Yet the conditions there were terrifying. Extreme dryness, strong winds, and abundant slash from logging created a landscape primed to explode. Survivors described a world of firestorms, flying embers, and air so hot it felt impossible to breathe. The tragedy remains one of the clearest reminders that fame and scale are not the same thing. The most remembered fire is not always the one that took the most lives. The Black Saturday fires changed Australia's understanding of fire risk. Some disasters become turning points, and Black Saturday in Australia was one of them. The fires that swept through parts of Victoria in intense heat and violent wind were so extreme that they changed the national conversation about what wildfire could do. This was not merely a bad fire day. It exposed how quickly ordinary assumptions about warning, escape, shelter, and survivability could collapse under exceptional conditions. Whole communities were shattered. Lives were lost at terrible scale. The event also challenged long-held ideas about staying to defend homes versus leaving early, and it forced new scrutiny of building standards, emergency messaging, power infrastructure, and land management. In the years since, Black Saturday has remained more than a tragedy. It has become a kind of benchmark for extreme fire behavior and human vulnerability. Australians already knew fire deeply. What changed was the understanding of just how unforgiving certain combinations of weather, fuel, and landscape could become in a single day. The Yellowstone fires transformed how many people viewed wildfire. When huge fires swept through Yellowstone in the late 20th century, many people watching from outside the science saw only disaster. The images were dramatic, the smoke enormous, and the idea of a beloved national park burning felt shocking. Yet what followed changed public understanding in a lasting way. Scientists and land managers emphasized that large fires had always been part of Yellowstone's long ecological history. Lodgepole pine forests there had evolved with stand-replacing burns. Meadows, shrubs, wildlife patterns, and regeneration all reflected that rhythm. In the years after the flames, the park began showing something many people did not expect. New growth returned. Seedlings covered blackened slopes. Habitat changed rather than vanished. The fires did not erase Yellowstone. They revealed a different Yellowstone, one shaped by renewal as well as loss. For many observers, that was a major shift. Wildfire stopped looking only like ruin and began to appear as one of the forces that had always helped build the landscape. Portugal's deadly fires showed how weather can overwhelm escape. In Portugal, some of the most lethal wildfire events revealed a brutal truth about fire in settled landscapes. Under extreme heat, drought, and fast-moving wind, the time available to escape can collapse with frightening speed. Roads that look like salvation on an ordinary day can become traps when smoke thickens, embers fall, and flames move faster than expected through forests and rural terrain. The tragedy was not only about ignition. It was about how weather can accelerate a fire so quickly that ordinary decisions become impossible. Visibility disappears. Heat surges across escape routes. People who believe they still have time suddenly do not. That is what made those fires such a stark warning to the rest of the world. The danger was not abstract. It was immediate, mobile, and shaped by atmospheric conditions powerful enough to outrun planning. Portugal's deadly seasons showed that in the worst circumstances, wildfire can close the gap between hazard and catastrophe before people fully understand what is happening. California's Camp Fire destroyed paradise with shocking speed. The Camp Fire became one of the clearest modern examples of how quickly a community can be overwhelmed when extreme fire behavior meets a vulnerable town. Driven by dry fuels, fierce wind, and steep terrain, the blaze tore into paradise with extraordinary speed. People awoke into chaos. Streets jammed with traffic. Power failed. Smoke and ember attack arrived almost at once. Buildings ignited in clusters, then in waves, and the town became a maze of heat, confusion, and delayed escape. What made the event so haunting was the pace. This was not a slow approach that gave everyone hours to think. It was a rapid collapse of normal life into emergency. Paradise became a symbol not only of loss, but of the modern wildfire era, where whole communities can be overtaken in a matter of hours when weather, fuel, and settlement align in the worst possible way. The lesson was painful and clear. Speed changes everything, including what survival looks like. Canada's recent fire seasons filled distant cities with smoke. In recent years, Canada's wildfire seasons have shown how a country's vast northern and western fires can affect people living far from the burn zones themselves. Smoke spread south into major cities, east across provinces, and even across the Atlantic, dimming skylines and turning daylight strange in places that never saw a flame. Urban residents who may have thought of wildfire as a remote forest problem suddenly found the hazard in the air they were breathing. Schools changed activities. Air quality warnings surged. Familiar city landmarks faded behind haze from fires burning hundreds or thousands of miles away. That shift mattered because it made the reach of wildfire impossible to ignore. Canada's forests are immense, and when severe seasons take hold, their smoke does not remain within provincial borders or wilderness boundaries. It travels. It lingers. It reshapes daily life far away. The flames may stay remote, but the atmosphere carries the event into distant streets and living rooms. Siberian wildfires have burned across immense and remote territory. Siberia is so vast that its fires can unfold across distances difficult for the mind to picture. Forests, peatlands, and tundra-like regions stretch across an enormous part of northern Asia, and when major wildfire seasons take hold there, the scale can become almost planetary in feeling. Some of these burns occur far from dense populations, which means they may receive less immediate global attention than fires near cities. Yet their remoteness does not make them small. Smoke plumes can cover huge regions. Carbon-rich soils and forests can burn for long periods. Monitoring becomes difficult because access is limited and the terrain is immense. There is something haunting about such fires. They can rage through landscapes that feel almost beyond the reach of ordinary human presence, and still alter the atmosphere far away. Siberian wildfire reminds us that some of the world's largest fire stories happen in places that seem empty on a map, but are ecologically enormous. Mediterranean landscapes have lived with fire for millennia. Around the Mediterranean, fire is not a new arrival. Hot, dry summers, flammable shrubs, strong seasonal winds, and long human presence have made burning part of the region's story for thousands of years. From Spain and Portugal to Greece, Italy, and beyond, ecosystems and cultures alike have been shaped by this recurring relationship with flame. Many plants show traits suited to drought and disturbance. Rural traditions once included grazing, wood gathering, and land use patterns that influenced how fuels accumulated. Ancient terraces, olive groves, scrublands, and forests all formed part of a fire-prone mosaic. What makes the region so compelling is that it is both ecological and historical at once. Fire there belongs to climate, vegetation, agriculture, and settlement history all together. The danger is real, but so is the depth of the relationship. In Mediterranean country, wildfire is not simply a modern crisis. It is an old companion, sometimes manageable, sometimes deadly, always present in the background of the land. Satellites now watch wildfires from space in near real time. One of the most extraordinary changes in modern fire science is that many wildfires can now be tracked from orbit as they unfold. Satellites detect heat, smoke, and changes on the land surface, giving scientists and fire managers a broad view that no one standing on the ground could ever have. They can reveal how large a fire has become, where the hottest areas are, how smoke is drifting, and which communities may be downwind or at risk. Some satellite systems update frequently enough that the picture feels close to live, especially when combined with weather data and ground reports. It is a remarkable contrast. An ancient force that once could only be seen from a hilltop is now watched from space. Fire remains local in its danger, but global in its visibility. The view from orbit has changed forecasting, response, and public awareness. A forest can ignite in remote country, and soon the whole planet can see the scar it is drawing. Infrared sensors can find hotspots hidden beneath smoke. Smoke is one of wildfire's best disguises. It hides flame fronts, buries glowing edges, and makes it hard for crews and aircraft to see what is still actively burning. Infrared sensing changes that by looking for heat rather than visible light. Through thick smoke, and sometimes even through darkness, infrared instruments can reveal hotspots, active fire lines, and buried pockets of combustion that ordinary cameras would miss. This makes them invaluable for mapping, night operations, and post-fire mop-up. A slope that looks quiet in visible light may still contain dangerous heat. Infrared shows the hidden picture. It is almost like giving firefighters a second vision, one tuned not to the appearance of the landscape, but to its temperature. That shift matters, because wildfire often deceives the eye. The absence of visible flame does not always mean safety. Infrared sensing helps expose the truth beneath the smoke, where the fire may still be alive and waiting for the next burst of wind. Drones can map fire edges, where crews cannot safely go. Wildfire often burns in places too steep, too smoky, too unstable, or too dangerous for people to approach closely. Drones have become a powerful answer to that problem. Small aircraft equipped with cameras and thermal sensors can fly over active edges, map perimeters, identify hotspots, and gather imagery from canyons, ridges, and burn scars, where ground access would be risky or impossible. They do not replace firefighters, but they extend what firefighters can know. A crew no longer has to rely only on line of sight or delayed aerial observations. The drone can provide a fresh view of where the fire is, how it is moving, and where the hidden heat remains. That is especially valuable after dark, when some fire behavior changes and visibility becomes even more difficult. In a sense, drones let people scout the fire without stepping directly into its path. They are a modern eye in the smoke, giving information where danger once meant blindness. Scientists read tree rings to reconstruct centuries of fire history. Trees do not merely survive fire. Some of them record it. When a blaze scars a living trunk without killing the whole tree, the damage becomes part of the growth pattern that follows. Later, rings form around the wound, preserving the year, and sometimes even the season, when the injury occurred. By studying these fire scars across many trees in one landscape, scientists can reconstruct long records of when fires happened, how often they returned, and whether they were widespread or local. It is one of the most elegant methods in fire science because it turns the forest itself into an archive. There are no written reports for many of these old burns. The evidence lives in wood. Ring by ring, a pattern emerges. Quiet years, frequent surface fires, long gaps, then perhaps a more severe event. Through that record, the landscape begins to speak in time. The tree did not only endure the fire, it kept a calendar of it. Charcoal buried in lake mud records ancient wildfire eras. Long before people were writing about wildfire, lakes were keeping their own records. After a burn, tiny pieces of charcoal can wash or drift into nearby water and settle onto the lakebed. Layer by layer, year after year, mud builds above them. Over time, those buried sediments become a remarkably rich archive of past fire activity. Scientists can core into the lake bottom and read the sequence almost like pages in a book. More charcoal in one layer may signal periods of increased burning. Less may suggest calmer eras, wetter climates, or fewer ignitions. Combined with pollen, chemistry, and dating techniques, these lake records can reveal how fire regimes changed across centuries and even millennia. What makes this so fascinating is the scale of memory involved. A quiet mountain lake may appear still and simple on the surface, yet beneath it lies a history of vanished forests, ancient droughts, and long-forgotten fire seasons preserved in dark sediment and ash. Some giant trees carry fire scars like living archives. In certain old forests, a single giant tree may contain a wildfire history older than many human institutions. When repeated low or moderate fires scar the same trunk across centuries, each wound becomes part of the tree's body and growth. Over time, the bark and wood can hold a series of healed edges, burn marks and ring patterns that reveal not one fire, but many. To stand before such a tree is to stand before a witness. It has lived through changing climates, passing storms, and generations of flame. Unlike dead charcoal in mud or cup samples in a lab, this archive is still alive, still rooted, still adding new wood around old injuries. That gives it unusual power. The tree is both record and survivor. It shows that a forest may have burned many times without being erased. In its massive trunk, the history of fire is not abstract. It is carved directly into living tissue. Wildfire can reveal buried ruins, artifacts, and older landscapes. Fire destroys, but it can also strip away the modern surface and expose what lay hidden beneath it. When vegetation burns off a landscape, old stone walls, road traces, terraces, foundations, and archaeological features sometimes become suddenly visible from the air or on the ground. In some cases, artifacts long concealed by dense brush or forest cover are noticed for the first time after a burn. Even older landscape patterns can reappear, such as forgotten field systems, historical paths, or the outlines of settlements erased from everyday view. This does not make wildfire a welcome archaeological tool because heat can damage sites too. Yet it does reveal something remarkable. The land holds memory beneath the living cover, and fire can momentarily uncover it. A hillside that seemed entirely natural may turn out to carry the marks of earlier people, economies, and ways of living. In that sense, wildfire can briefly peel back time as well as vegetation. Smoke particles can influence clouds and even regional rainfall. Wildfire smoke does more than block sunlight. The particles within it can interact with the atmosphere in ways that influence cloud formation and, under some conditions, rainfall patterns. Tiny aerosols can serve as nuclei around which water droplets form, changing the number and size of droplets inside clouds. That can affect whether clouds brighten, how long they last, and how easily rain falls out of them. In heavily smoky conditions, the atmosphere may behave differently across a whole region, not just over the active fire. This is one of wildfire's most far-reaching powers. It begins with burning vegetation at the surface, then extends upward into cloud physics and atmospheric processes. The exact effects can vary, but the principle is astonishing enough on its own. Fire changes the sky not only by filling it with haze, but by altering the ingredients clouds use to build themselves. A forest burns, and even the rainfall story may shift. Fire is chemistry, weather, ecology, and history all at once. Part of what makes wildfire so captivating is that it refuses to belong to only one field of knowledge. At its core, it is chemistry, the rapid oxidation of fuel releasing heat, light, and gases. Yet it is also weather, because wind, humidity, temperature, and atmospheric instability shape what happened next. It is ecology, because species, landscapes, soils, and recovery all depend on how fire moves and how often it returns. And it is history, because human settlement, land management, cultural burning, logging, suppression, and climate all leave their fingerprints on the fire of the present. To study wildfire properly, you have to hold all of these at once. That is why it feels so much larger than a flame front on a hillside. It is one of the rare natural forces where molecules, forests, storms, and centuries of human decisions all meet in a single event. Fire burns in the present, but it carries many stories into that moment. Human decisions often shape wildfire long before the ignition. By the time a spark appears, much of the fire's future may already have been influenced by choices made over years or decades. Where homes were built, how power lines were maintained, whether low-intensity burns were allowed or suppressed, how forests were thinned, how roads were planned, what plants were encouraged near neighborhoods, and how warnings were designed, all help shape what kind of disaster or manageable event an ignition may become. This does not mean people control fire completely. Weather and landscape still matter enormously. But it does mean wildfire is never purely an accident of the moment. Long before the first flame, human systems have been laying out pathways of risk or resilience. That is one reason modern wildfire can feel so complicated. It is not only a natural force arriving from outside society. It is also a mirror held up to past decisions. The fire may begin with a spark, but its consequences are often prepared well in advance. Wildfire is ancient, terrifying, and deeply woven into life on Earth. Long before human beings learned to tend campfires or fear smoke on the horizon, lightning was already setting vegetation alight and shaping the biosphere. Fire has moved through grasslands, forests, peatlands, and shrublands for millions of years, altering species, recycling nutrients, opening habitat, and occasionally causing immense destruction. It belongs to Earth's story at a very deep level. That is part of why wildfire feels so powerful. It is both familiar and primeval. We know it as heat, light, and danger. Yet it also helped shape the landscapes, plants, and ecological strategies that surround us now. Some species depend on it. Others flee it. Humans both fear it and use it. In wildfire, creation and devastation sit uncomfortably close together. That tension may be the deepest truth of all. Fire is not an intruder from outside nature. It is one of nature's oldest forces, terrifying when unleashed, but inseparable from the living world that grew up around it. Thank you for spending this time with me, here on the Sleepy Science Channel. Tonight, we wandered through the world of wildfires. Through forests that need flame to renew themselves, through storms born from heat and smoke, through seeds released by fire, and animals that return to blackened ground almost as if they were answering an ancient call. We followed fire into treetops, into peat below the soil, into rivers, skies, and even the upper atmosphere. And along the way, we saw something strange and unforgettable. That wildfire is never just one thing. It is danger, renewal, weather, chemistry, memory, and change, all moving together across the land. Perhaps now you can picture it differently. A dark hillside glowing at the edges. Smoke rising into a copper sky. A pine cone opening in the heat. Green shoots appearing through ash. A great old tree carrying the marks of fires long gone. The story of wildfire is fierce, but it is also ancient and woven deeply into the living world. As this journey comes to an end, let your thoughts grow quieter now. Let the images drift more softly. Let the heat, the smoke, the forests, and the distant glow settle into the background as your breathing slows and the day begins to loosen its grip. And if you're still awake, there will be another video waiting for you on screen. You're very welcome to continue your journey with me there. And if you enjoyed tonight's exploration, a like, a subscription, or a quiet thought below always helps more wandering minds find their way here. For now, just rest. Let your body soften. Let your thoughts dim like embers after rain. Sleep well and good night.